So next on our list is to learn about curves. This one, by the way, I've had a lot of students do, and it's a good one because it has a lot of basic primitive shapes, allows you to get those down pretty quickly, and then really kind of focus on how do you want to do the more subtle aspects, like what's going on here with the shifting of color, this here. Now, I'm okay if this is just a single line. But I will say that I have had several students kind of figure out hacks in a way of how you can give the illusion, not actually creating this shape, but giving it the illusion that this shape is here that is like wider here and more narrow here. It sort of has something to do with this blue space around it. And then, so these are all pretty straightforward. And then for this is where you can really spend a little bit of time of trying to figure out how you want to do it. Now, I'm going to be okay again if it's just one arc here of the same thickness, that's okay. But if you want to take the challenge, it's a pretty good challenge of trying to figure out how you can get this point here, how you could get this kind of this curvature in the points. You know, it's not impossible, or it could be fun, but you don't have to. So curves, I'm really just going to point out like how they work, and you're going to have a bunch of examples to come back to as a reference here. So when you look at curve, pull up the processing reference page. Oh, sorry, I thought I had it here. Go back to the processing reference. I'm under curves, and here it is, curve. And first of all, so the reason I want to explain it is because you have all this x1, y1, all of this kind of stuff. So what does all of this mean? And they talk about beginning control point, first point, second point, ending control point. Okay, well, that's what I'm going to go over. So to start with, so we have, what is it, a total of 8 different coordinates. So the first 2 coordinates that you mark are going to be for the control points. So if you've taken graphic design before, you know with the pen tool how you have the control points. The control points you pull and move around, and it can control like the curvature that you have. You don't actually see them. So I've marked them up in my illustration here as green. You won't see them. All you would see is the curve up here. But these control points affect the curvature. So the first 2 coordinates are for this end, this point here, the outside point of the control point. The next 2 coordinates are for one end of the curve, what we actually see. The next 2 for this end, the other end of the curve, what we actually see. And then the last 2 coordinates are for the other control point. So what I have here in my PowerPoint is basically just a lot of examples of like how do you get different shapes. So here we start out with kind of, I've given you some numbers, and it gives us like a small curve. And then if we wanted to get that curve higher, like a bigger curve, what you would do is you would take the control points of the y-axis, so what's vertical, and you would increase that number. So it's kind of like, imagine that these guys are being pulled down, and it creates tension. As you pull it down, it brings this up. So what you see highlighted in red is the only number that changes. So everything else in the code was the same. This is the y for my control point here. So that's the x and the y for this. And this is the x and the y for this side. So the x stays the same, it's just the y. Okay, so then I point out, like you've seen, and maybe in some of the Kandinskys, they're not perfect curves like this. They kind of flatten on the end. So here's how you could flatten. You've got to think of these as kind of like they're strings that you're pulling, like you pull them, and then it makes this flattened edge here. But basically I'm going to tell you to go into tweak mode and play with this. Alright, so what I changed in this is the y stays the same, so these are at the same level, but it is the x position that changed. So this one, instead of being straight, I dragged it over here, and this one, instead of being straight, I dragged it to the left. So they crisscrossing, and that kind of brings the corners in. And then same thing, if you want to, now that you have this curve with a little bit of flattened edges, you want to make it taller, then you drag down further. And it's okay, you can have numbers that are negative or positive higher than the screen. So I could have a screen size that's maybe only set to 300 in height and pull this down to 400. That still works. And then what if you wanted to flip it? Okay, so then we need to have our control points going above our curve here. And then I give you some more examples, like if you want to start getting, so it's not a symmetrical curve, but parts it leans more to the left or to the right. How would you do this? But basically, so you have a lot of examples here. What I want you to do is to go into processing and create a sketch, throw in some of the, one of the codes that I put, for example. We just make sure this is saved, and then we're going to bring it into tweak mode. Now before you bring it into tweak mode, and you may want to do this, like practice with your curves on a separate sketch. I mean, it can be in your Kandinsky, but just one thing I want to point out is you want to have a background in your draw to be able to work in the tweak mode, because if I don't, I'm going to go up to tweak mode. I thought I just saved it. Oh, I saved it and then I made a change. Okay, so go to tweak mode. Okay, if I don't have that chain, the background, and do you see how it's leaving the trail? And it's really hard for me to tell what it actually looks like because it's leaving the trail. It's getting thicker and thicker. So I am not going to save that change. And I'm going to bring my background back in. Now I'll save it again. Go back to tweak mode. And now I'll make the same kind of tweak I was doing before, where I was raising my y-axis to get the thicker curve. And now I can see what it would actually look like. So it may be that for your Kandinsky you want to have the background in your setup, but when working with the tweak mode, just temporarily put a background in draw, because what that is doing is every time it loops through the code, it adds the background, it puts another copy of it, and it covers up the trail. Right? So then you can just keep kind of tweaking and playing with the coordinates here to try to get the results that you want. I think the main thing is, though, just to understand what they control. So what the different coordinates are controlling. So if you want to control what you actually see, this point and this point, that's, you're going to be targeting the second set and the third set of the coordinates. Oh, sorry, this was my second set, and this is my third set. That controls what we actually see. The outer sets control the control points out here that we don't see. If you want to work with a Bezier, it just works in the exact opposite way. I'm not going to go over anything more, but the first set and the fourth sets are the endpoints. So those are the ones that you actually see. So it's just the opposite. So this one and this one, that's what you see. And the second set and the third set are the endpoints of your control, the ones that we don't see. So what I have marked here in red, you don't actually see. If you are on the processing reference page, you are welcome to look at other things here under curves, but I would basically stick to either a curve or a Bezier. Bezier, by the way, if you Google it, you can find a decent amount of examples of just like what the curve would look like with the control points. So that's a pretty good one. And now we're going to jump down here to the vertex. So we've already looked at begin shape, end shape, and there's more here than what I've covered. If you want to go back and check this out, there's actually some arguments you can give for how the shapes would work. That's pretty cool. And what I'm going to cover right now is the curve vertex. So it's very similar to begin shape. So it's really good if you just want to draw out some kind of curve. Like you just want to, this isn't an arc and it's not like a pure curve. It's just like a squiggly lines, for example. So it's going to start in the same way as our begin shape, end shape did. with begin shape, open parentheses, semicolon, you're going to put in your coordinates and end shape here. But the difference is, first of all, you're going to put curve vertex instead of just vertex, and vertex is capitalized. You're still just mapping out your points here, but the key to get this to work, and it will not work, it will not give you the results if you don't do this, is you have to duplicate your first set and your last set. That's because those are actually control points. So if you have these as different numbers, they're control points, and it's going to mess up your next set of numbers. So the way to do it, duplicate. So this is my first set, this is 100, 100, and I repeated it. Then this is my next one, 120, 130, 175, 180, 125, 200, 115, 250, that's my last one, and I duplicated it, I repeated it. Okay, so the hardest thing about working with the curve vertex is quite simply just knowing where to map out the vertex, the points. If you put too few or too many, it can affect the curvature. So this is, trying to use an example of, I think these kind of curves here would be perfect for the curve vertex. So what you're looking at is you're just trying to find that vertex, the point where the curve changes. So in other words, if I just put one here and one here, then I'm just going to get like a low curve from here to here. So you need to reach for the point, the vertex here, mark that out, mark this out, really very much like you did for the begin shape, end shape. It's just that the end result will be curved lines instead of instead of straight lines. Okay? So tips, just make sure you use the things that we've talked about. Print line, mouse X and mouse Y can really help you find your coordinates. Use the tweak mode, and use Photoshop also to help you get a lot of your coordinates and your colors.